Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Business Builder webinar number 3. This is a regular series of webinars that we're holding every 2 months. My name's Mark Lawson, Managing Director of Business Vision, accountants who specialise in growing businesses, helping them to increase their profit and reduce tax. Subject today is sellability. I'll just go through in a few minutes what we're going to touch on and what we're going to go through. But firstly, realise that most of these events are recorded, and we're hoping to record this one also. So if you don't get to catch it all, or if you haven't seen the previous webinars, then you can catch them all on our YouTube site, which is on the screen now, Be Visionify. So you can go along there, and there's probably a good half dozen to a dozen videos there now, all about how to grow your business. There's also lots of other resources at our website. Details of the website address are there. So let's just go through. We're probably going to spend about 45 minutes going through sellability, might overstretch that slightly. And mainly we're going to talk about the owner's trap, which is where most businesses are at the moment in our experience. And crucially, we're then going to touch on how you get out of that and the 8 key factors to escape the owner's trap. And at the end of it, we'll be offering you a free sellability report that will score your business on those 8 key factors. So you get a number out of 100 that tells you exactly how you're doing and what improvements you can make, and more importantly, how you're going to make them. So sellability, some of the initial bits of today are based on an excellent book by John Warrillow called Built to Sell. If you haven't read that book yet, I strongly suggest that you do. It's an excellent book on how you can grow your business, but we're going to touch on many of those points during the course of today. And really what we're looking at to start with is why you go into business. In our experience, that's usually to get freedom. Freedom to do the type of work you want to do, freedom to work with the type of people you want to work with, freedom to do the type of work when you want to do it. But the reality is that many businesses are actually caught in the owner's trap. And that can take various forms, but in its simplistic version, it basically means that the owner still does the selling. They're still interfacing with the customer. They generally overpromise in terms of speed, but also in terms of offering too many things to that customer. And they offer a lot of things that only the owner is capable of delivering, which generally means that the owner's then in front of the customer once again doing those things, so the customer has interactions with them, and that's when the selling retakes place. So that's a vicious circle that doesn't help any owner. Other signs that you're in the owner's trap might be that your business slows down when you go away, or worse still, you don't go away because you fear that it might slow down or even completely disintegrate. You still do most of the work in your business, and by work I mean the operational work, not the sort of managing director strategic work. There's a general feeling of being a bit like a headless chicken, running around, going from job to job, and feeling like it can all get a little bit on top of you. The customers tend to come to you, the business owner, rather than to managers or other people working in the business. And probably the most important thing is that there's a feeling that the sales and profit of the business have peaked. So every year might be going up by inflation, but really there's no major growth being achieved because of all those other problems with the owner's trap. So let's just look at what sellability in the webinar today is going to go through, because there might be a fear that we're just going to be guiding you on how to get your business ready to sell. And although that certainly is one of the things that will happen from today's webinar, it's certainly not the only outcome that you can get yourself ready for. So the webinar is going to help you scale your business up. So it will help you grow it, which obviously most people will want to do. It will certainly get you ready to sell it, and we'll look at it from a buyer's point of view as to what they're looking to get if you do want to sell it. it will allow you to become what I call the true owner of a business, which is somebody who basically sits back, looks at the strategy for the business, how to run it, what to do, but certainly not doing any of that, and giving those visions and strategies to managing directors and managers, and effectively just sitting in on board meetings possibly, and crucially still taking dividends and profits from the business. So a little bit more like a Richard Branson type style of working than actually being deep down within the business. So if you wanted to get to that stage and just let the business carry on still paying you money but without actually having to do much to achieve that, then we'll certainly be touching on that. And if you want to pass it down to kids or members of your team, employees, then it will allow you to do that as well. So all of the options available to you will be good, positive options, and the one that we're effectively trying to avoid is a business that isn't sellable, where you have to work mad throughout your working life, possibly into normal retirement age, and then just simply drop the business without having any value at the end, simply because it can't be sold or there isn't enough profit there to make it sellable. So that would be the worst scenario. It would be a bit like buying a house, renting it out, and then just getting it destroyed at the end. So hopefully, regardless of what actions you want to take in the future, the webinar today will enable you to do that. And it will ultimately give you the maximum freedom to choose and do whatever you like. So it doesn't matter which of those four you want to do, and you may change your mind over the forthcoming years, but whatever option you decide on in the end, today's webinar will help you achieve that. So I promised we'd look at 8 key factors, so let's just start doing that. Some of these won't make any sense, but we'll go through each one individually. So we'll be looking at financial performance, growth potential, the Switzerland structure, the valuation teeter-totter, recurring revenue, monopoly control, customer satisfaction, and hub and spoke. Now I'm guessing probably only 2 or 3 of those might actually mean anything, but as I say, we will go through each one individually to try and make sense of that. And these are 8 key factors that would be vital to sell the business to a potential buyer, but also vital to get to any of the stages we discussed earlier in terms of scaling the business up, being able to take a back seat and just take the money. So you'd be sitting on a beach in the Bahamas, looking at the financial accounts that come through from the managing director, make a few strategic decisions, and then just check everything's okay and go back to the pina colada. So we'll go through those, starting with financial performance, which is probably the obvious thing that we would expect to happen. And what a business buyer is typically going to do is ask 2 questions. He's going to be asking, how much money does the company make? And he's not going to be specifically asking how much it makes in the past. So the old accounts will be useful, but that's not really what he's interested in, because that's what the business has already made, and those profits went to you. What he's interested in is what profits will be made in the future, because those are the figures that they'll be inheriting. And probably more important than looking at projections and where previous years are indicating the trend might go to, they'll be asking how reliable are those forecasts and estimates, because the more reliable they are, the more they can work out accurate figures for valuation and be certain about what they're going to inherit. So let's just look at how a buyer would look at the valuation of a business's goodwill. Now, before we do that, let me just stress that goodwill is the value of a business above and beyond the actual things. So a buyer will certainly pay you for stock. They'll pay you for the value of the assets and the premises and the vans. All of that will be valued possibly by an expert, but certainly not by an accountant necessarily. And that figure will be on top of goodwill. What we're looking at here is the value of future profits. So let's just take a business that's making £100,000 profit. Now again, when you're selling a business, that profit figure usually is per the accounts, but adjusted by things that aren't going to happen in the future and also by an adjustment for the owner's salary. So if you run a business, and like many businesses, you maybe take dividends that aren't shown in the profit and loss, or you actually take out less than you need because the business can't afford it, then an adjustment will be made to insert a fair value for what your work would be based on the amount of time you're spending. So this figure isn't necessarily the figure in the accounts, it's an adjusted figure. And let's just say in this example that the figure is £100,000. And let's say that the business projects that it's going to make £100,000 for the foreseeable future. Now, a business buyer is effectively an investor. You may find somebody who does the same type of business who wants to expand and take over your business, or somebody who wants to get into that business specifically, but it still helps to think of them as an investor. And generally there are a lot more investors around now buying businesses than there are true business people that are already running a business. Now, the investor's looking for a return, and they're probably only getting 2, 3, 4% on their investment savings elsewhere. So businesses can be a good form of making more money. So let's just say that they decide that they're going to look for a 15% return, bearing in mind that buying businesses is always riskier than deposits accounts and stocks and shares. So if we plan ahead, they'll be buying your first year's profit in the future at a 15% discount. So that gives you a payment of 86,957. They'll also be buying the profit from 2 years ahead, but because that's 2 years further on, then there'll be a discount of 15% compounded for both years, which gives you a figure of 75614, and so on. And if we extrapolate that to year 10 and add up all the figures, then that would be a value for goodwill of about £501,000. So based on a 15% discount, if they basically paid that much money, after 10 years they'll have earned a 15% return, which is not bad at all. And that's typically the format that will be used. They may not go through that exact same methodology. They might just simply work out 4 to 5 times profit, but it's all based on pretty much similar processes. Now let's look at a slightly different scenario where, because of uncertainty or because the various factors that we're going to go through in a moment aren't all in place and looking as good, the buyer decides that actually they're going to make a 50% discount because they want a 50% return, because they're not that sure that it's going to continue for 10 years, or they're not sure that it's going to continue for 10 years at the £100,000 predicted profit. So if the factors we're going to run through today aren't in place, they're probably going to want more risk reversal and they're going to offer a bigger discount. So if they wanted a 50% discount, then working through the same principle, then the figure that they would arrive at is only £196,000. So it makes sense purely from a valuation of goodwill point of view that we try and get all the factors we're going to talk about today as high as possible so that that discount is as low as possible. And I can tell you that if somebody bought McDonald's, then typically they would be selling for about 10 times profit, i.e. the valuation of a £100,000 profit McDonald's would be £1 million. And the reason for that is because they score very highly on all these points, and there is almost a definite guarantee of profits in the future because there are so many around making exactly the same level of profits. So McDonald's would be very certain. A small owner-managed business would be far less certain, and we're going to run through the other points that will help you get that working. So point number 2 in the 8 factors is growth potential. So a business buyer is going to look at what's the growth potential of the business, and that's largely going to depend to some extent on marketing and where in its life cycle the business is. But typically a business buyer is going to look at what the business does, and they're going to be looking for areas that are good areas to take over. And the 3 factors that they generally look for there are those sales avenues teachable? Because obviously if the business owner knows them and nobody else, then that's going to have to be taught to somebody else because the business owner will be going. So are those sales channels teachable? Are those sales channels valuable, which is obviously an exercise we should be doing regularly regardless of sellability? And are those revenue channels repeatable? And we'll come on to that a bit later, but by that we mean, is it easy to get recurring income, or do we have to go out every time and find a new customer and sell them whatever it is we're selling them? But we'll touch on that later. So is it easy to teach the employees what you do in those sales channels? Are they valuable sales channels, and are they likely to produce recurring income without too much fuss? If all of those factors score high, then you will do very well in this particular area. So just to give you an idea of what we mean by that, let's just look at and imagine you own a photography business. So on the left hand side there, you can see that this particular photography business has 4 different key sales channels. They do weddings, they do some photography for football teams, probably got a deal struck up with a local football team, they do corporate events for businesses, and they do school photos. And if we score that business on each of those 3 things I've just mentioned, is it teachable, is it valuable, and is it repeatable? If we take weddings, for example, is it teachable? Yes, but it's not a top score, because weddings will have events where there might be spontaneous moments, and a photographer needs to know how to react to that and how to catch that moment. So that's something that is not easily taught to a novice employee. So that scores 7. Is it valuable? Yes, wedding photography is valuable. People spend a lot of money at weddings, so there should be some good sales figures for that. Is it repeatable? Well, I've put in 0, although obviously that these days might not be always the case. There might be a second wedding in 10 years and they might come back to the same company, but let's hope that that's not the case. So the total score there for weddings is 16. And if we go through the same process for football teams, that's fairly easily taught, because they just sit in a set pose and you take photographs. It's not usually that valuable because there will be price sensitivities there. Is it repeatable? Yes. Well, usually they'll want you to come back every season and photograph them in the new kit with the new players, and that gets you a score of 21. And the same with corporate events. Now, if we move down to school photos, is that teachable? Yes, very easy to do. The teachers will get all the pupils lined up in the playground. They'll know how to sit them. So very easy to teach somebody else how to do that and take a photo or several photos. Is it valuable? Absolutely. There's good cross-selling potential there to individual pupils later, etc. And is it repeatable? Absolutely yes, because they'll want you to come back, if not every term time, certainly every year, for a new batch of students coming in. So of those 4 areas, school photos is clearly the best one, and that's the one that the business ought to be moving into and specializing in anticipation of getting the sellability score up, so that you can do either a sale or, as I say, pass it down to somebody else or just take a back seat. Doesn't mean you have to do away with all the others, but a buyer will be looking at school photos as the key area. So it may make sense that the business specializes in that. And if you want to see how that would work, then have a look at a website called www.tspc, and that's the school photography company, tspc.biz. And they've done exactly this. They're photographers and they only specialize in doing school photography. So their marketing is very much driven to schools and only schools, and they would have a very sellable business because of that. So that's growth potential. So it's something to have a look at in some detail. Third key factor is the Switzerland structure. Now, the reason we call it the Switzerland structure is what we're looking for here is some form of neutrality, as is the case with the country. So key areas we're looking for neutrality in are basically suppliers, employees and customers. We want to make sure that the business is as independent as possible of any supplier, employee or customer. And the reason for that, fairly obviously, is that a buyer or a management team, if you've passed the business down, want as little risk as possible. So if you don't have independence from those three, then if anything goes wrong with one of them, then the business can suffer drastically or even not be able to carry on. So looking at those individually, customers, typically what we want is no single customer being responsible for more than 15% of the annual sales. So if all your work is, for example, done with the local council or with, Babcock's dockyard, then a buyer will downgrade the buyability of your business quite severely, because if that a customer decides not to continue with contracts, or if they have problems or whatever, or they find a different supplier, then that means most of your sales are going to dry up overnight and you're left having to scrabble around to find new work. And certainly a buyer won't want to do that. Same goes with suppliers. We want a situation where you can switch suppliers easily. So if one supplier decides that they want to push the prices up to an extortionate figure, or if they can't supply in a qualitative way, so the quality of what they do is no longer any good because of their problems, or if they simply go out of business, then we need to be able to switch that very quickly and seamlessly to other suppliers. So no reliance on any key supplier, and similarly no reliance on any key employee, including yourself, the business owner. So the business needs to be able to manage with any employee deciding to up and leave, because that means you can simply hire new people or pass the work on to other employees and just carry on as normal. If one employee knows how to do most things and nobody else does, and they leave, then the business will suffer drastically as a result, and the sellability score will also drop enormously. Now, I did mention, just as an aside, but it is quite important, that one of the key employees in most small businesses is the actual business owner. So the first thing that you need to be looking at in a small business is to make sure that as much of what you do as possible, if not delegated to other people in the team, but at least systemized so that the knowledge of how to do it can be passed on very easily. If you know how to do everything and it's all in your head, then the minute you're sick or decide to exit the business, then there's a big chance that that business won't be able to continue, because nobody knows how to do what it was you did when you were running the business. Okay, next one is the valuation teeter-totter. And this is what John Warrilow calls it, because he's now based in America, although he is an English person. Teeter-totter we probably know better as seesaw. So if you think of that as the valuation seesaw, and let's look at what that means. So basically what that means is we need to get some sort of equalization between the value of a business and its working capital. Now, the reason for this is very simple. If you have a business that has high stock figures, high work in progress figures, so if there's always big contracts on the go that haven't yet been billed, or if you have high amounts of debtors, people who owe you money because you invoice and then wait 60 days, in the same way as that used up your money when you were in business, when you decide to retire or pass the business on, you will obviously want that money back. So from a business buyer's point of view, they're writing two checks. They're writing the check for the goodwill, so the value of future profits, but they're also going to have to give you the money to buy the stock, to buy the debtors, and to buy the work in progress. And that's a lot of extra money that they'll probably have to borrow or find that they won't get back until they in turn pass the business on. So the less reliant the business is on working capital, the more the sellability score will be and the more valuable the business will be. Now, you might say, well, that's all well and good, Mark, but in my business, it's standard that people take 90 days to pay. It's standard that we have a stock figure that's quite high, and that may well be the case. But if you want to get a high score from a sellability point of view, I would look long and hard at methods to reduce those figures if at all possible. And bear in mind that that's actually quite useful to do even if you start doing it now, because if you can reduce debtors now, that's going to give you more money in your bank account straight away. If you can reduce stock, then that's going to give you the money for the stock straight away. So you don't need to wait to sell the business to get these figures looked at. Look at them now. And if you think, well, the norm in your industry is that these figures are high, I would suggest you try and think outside the industry and try and find different methods of doing it. Just because that's the way that the business has always been run doesn't mean that it has to be. Just because you're in a business, let's take an accountant, for example, and the industry standard is that they do work, they bill, and then they get paid hopefully 90 days later. You don't have to accept that that's the way it will always be. And from a personal point of view, that's something we've changed in our business many, many years ago. We decided that we wouldn't wait 90 days and that we'd effectively have a monthly payment being made, so that by the time we came to do the work, some, if not all of the work, was effectively paid for and sat in our bank account. And that for us means that we have a far lower level of debtors than almost any other accountant working at the moment. And that's great news. So you don't have to accept how it's always been in your business. You don't have to accept how it is in your industry, but it will take a fair degree of work and brainstorming to try and find some methods to change that status quo. So next one is recurring revenue. So this is the fifth of the 8 keys, and this basically looks at recurring revenue, which we touched on earlier in terms of growth potential. And the question that the business owner is going to be asking here, and that you should be asking, is how much of our business is actually going to continue coming in, provided that we actually do a good job and we keep customers happy. So what's going to come in naturally? How often will it come in? How much of what we generally earn is going to come in, provided we don't do anything stupid? And how much of what we earn is one-off type transactions that we have to continually go out and find, try and get a customer, try and quote, try and sell to them, and then try and get them to sign on the dotted line, and then do the work, and then go off and then do the whole process over again. And clearly the reason why a business buyer would be interested in recurring revenue is because it's a lot less work, and it also to a large extent means that the likelihood of future profits being the same as past profits is quite high. As long as there's not a great reliance on the business owner being the life and soul of that particular business party, then a buyer or the management team can come in and the recurring revenue should just keep ticking over, provided that the business keeps doing what it used to do. And to give you an example of that, let's look at a security company that provide security, burglar alarms, security alarms for homes or businesses, doesn't particularly matter. If you think about what a security company actually does, they do 2 general key types of work. What they'll do is they'll come along to your house and they'll fit a burglar alarm, and they'll usually charge a fee for that. So they might come along, fit the burglar alarm, fit all the wiring, fit all the detectors, etc., etc., show you how to work it, fit the alarm pads, and then charge you, let's say, £1,000 for the privilege. But they're never going to do that again in your house unless the whole thing deteriorates. So certainly in the foreseeable future, that's that sale gone, and they need to go and find another person in a different house to sell them. So that's not recurring income. But their other type of income is where they charge maintenance fees, which is basically a smaller monthly fee for checking the monitoring, for basically coming down and checking any alarms that go off and sorting out any problems. It may even in some cases be a direct link to some sort of central station, where if you do have a burglar or you suspect that there might be something going wrong, you can go straight through to that central station and chat to somebody, and they'll send somebody out if needs be. And for that privilege, they charge you a monthly fee on direct debit of, let's say, 50, 60 quid a month. And that for them is recurring revenue, because as long as they keep doing their work satisfactorily, you'll probably stay with them, because after all, it's their burglar alarm equipment anyway, and you've got no problems with them. So you just continue paying that monthly fee until such stage as they do something bad and you decide to switch, or for some reason your sensitivity to price is such that you decide you don't want to continue paying that sort of money. But generally that's going to be continuing for the foreseeable future. So let's look at that in terms of specific numbers. So let's just take a business that does £1 million worth of sales. So a security company, £1 million worth of sales. typically the industry standard, if they did all of their work just as installation, so if all they did is came along, fitted the security equipment and then disappeared, didn't do anything else, the valuation of that £1 million turnover would only be 75p in the pound, so £750,000. So you might think that's a reasonable figure, but the reality is if that business instead was doing 100% monitoring, i.e. they didn't do any installation work, they just did the monthly checking and billing, then that business typically, as an industry standard, would achieve 2 times turnover. So instead of 75p in the pound, it would be £2 for every pound's worth of sales. And that really means that a buyer, because this is numbers from the real world, a buyer of a security company will pay 2.5 times as much for sales that are coming from recurring income than they would sales that are coming from one-off installation work. So that gives you a fairly clear idea of how valuable recurring income can be. Now, I know in many businesses you might say, well, we can't do recurring income, that's not the nature of what we do. But increasingly, we're advising businesses on trying to find that recurring income within their business or reinvent the business so that there is recurring income. It's got so many different benefits. Selling, obviously, in the valuation will be one of them, but it's just so much easier to run a business with recurring income. And increasingly, we're finding that with the cloud and things like that, subscription-based businesses are becoming ever more popular. If you look at people like Microsoft, what used to be a case where you buy software once and then they try and pressurize you to upgrade it every 2 or 3 years, is now becoming a monthly payment where you get the latest software for 30, 40 quid a month. Similarly, if you look at bookkeeping software, Sage used to and still does to a large extent still sell each item of software as an individual bit for you to install on your computer, and they will try and upgrade that from time to time, but typically that's a one-off sale, whereas increasingly bookkeeping companies now, especially our favourite Xero, is charging £20 per month for online software, no installation cost, and they will be a hugely valuable business compared to Sage very quickly. So if you haven't got recurring income, then I would spend some time trying to brainstorm how you can, and we will be looking at a whole webinar or possibly even a seminar or both on this subject, because it's going to be crucial for businesses. And interestingly enough, I think John Warrilow is bringing out a new book in 2015 that deals with specifically this subject. So if you're worried about how you can do this, then certainly have a chat with us, but it will be something that we'll be touching on again and again in more detail. But just as a sort of flavour, let me just guide you through the 6 key types of recurring income in the order of the least valuable to the most valuable. So in 6th place, we've got basic consumables. And an example of that would be, let's say, Starbucks selling coffee. There's no reason that you would actually come back, but it is a consumable. So once you've had 1 cup of coffee, in a few days or a few weeks, you're probably going to want another one and you'll come back. And again, as long as you're happy with Starbucks, that's probably what you'll buy. So that's a basic consumable. It is going to be slightly recurring because they'll have you as a happy customer, but there's no guarantee, and the choice of when it recurs is largely down to the customer. The next one, the one in 5th place, is what we call sunk money. And this basically means that you have to make an investment early on, and then you're almost forced into then having some sort of future consumable cost. And an example of that would be, for example, an espresso coffee machine. You buy as a one-off item the coffee machine, and then you have to go and buy the pods to go in the coffee machine because they're only made by Nespresso. So from Nespresso's point of view, they're obviously not just doing the installation, i.e. selling you the machine, they're then selling you the consumables. And that's a form of recurring income. It's 5th, so it's not brilliant. Number 4 is subscription type recurring income. So an obvious example of that would be magazines, where you take out a yearly subscription and they collect a direct debit every month and deliver your magazine to you. 3rd is sunk money and subscription. So this is a situation where you have to actually pay an upfront figure and then go on to a subscription model. So for us, that might be we pay to go on a training course for, say, £1,000, and we get given loads of tools and resources at that course, and we then have to pay a monthly subscription to be able to use those tools and resources. Second would be auto renewal subscription. So this basically says that there is a subscription on a regular basis, but it will automatically renew unless the subscriber decides not to. So an example of that would be the Zero Bookkeeping Online, where you pay £20 a month, and basically there would be an automatic renewal every month unless you decide to stop it. And in first place is a multi-year plan, where basically you've signed up for a renewal subscription on a multiple year basis. And a great example of that would be your mobile telephone contracts, where typically you're signed in for 2 or 3 years with monthly payments going out. So that telephone company knows for sure that they're going to get your money for the next 2 or 3 years regardless, and that obviously makes it a very sellable business. So that's recurring income, very important, and we will be coming back to that in some detail. Next one is monopoly control. So the sixth one is monopoly control, and what we mean by that is how differentiated are you in the marketplace? Are you one of many doing identical things, or actually are you standing alone doing something completely unique? Because it's the unique businesses that tend to be more sellable. If there's loads of competition around, then your business isn't so easy to move forward. So if you're one of many electricians, unfortunately, if you do the same work as all the other electricians, then the business value will be low, because it's so easy for the competition to just take over your customers and sales further down the road. So a business buyer is looking to see how differentiated you are. And again, huge area that we've touched on in past seminars and will no doubt touch on again, but the cycle of virtue there is that if you get marketing differentiation, i.e. you present yourself as unique, a bit like the school photographers, so you're doing something completely different from all the others, your market share will be a lot lower, so there'll be less people that want that niche, if you like. But the fact is that by having that differentiation, you can control the pricing and make higher prices. The more specialized the business is, the higher the prices can go. And a good example of that is a general practitioner doctor will earn a lot less than a brain surgeon because they're specialists. The higher pricing obviously results in higher margins, and the higher margins will then allow you to have more money for marketing, which will then attract more marketing differentiation. So differentiation, not being one of a huge crowd, is vital. And again, just quickly look at an example of that, which is laptops. A while ago, Panasonic wanted to break into the laptop market, and you can see that the two axes that we're looking at are, do customers care? So do customers want what we have? How involved are they? Obviously, the more that is, the better. And at the same time, on the other axis, we've got how differentiated are we, i.e. how many other people are doing exactly the same thing. Now, with laptops, obviously what customers want are the things at the sort of bottom right, which is sexy, innovative, direct facilities with their laptop. But the reality is, when Panasonic were launching, Dell, Apple, Hewlett-Packard were already doing all those things perfectly well, and they'd obviously been in the market for some time, so they had some cost savings and they already had loyal customers. So it was going to be a very difficult market to break in. So what Panasonic did is they differentiated by basically building something called the Toughbook brand, which was designed for people like builders, architects, people actually out working on their tools who might be dropping these laptops. They're going to get banged around, and they made them very specifically tough to cope with all that. So completely different type of marketplace. Obviously not so many people. They're not going to be selling those to people sat in an office, but they are going to sell them to very specific type of people who don't want their laptops getting banged around and having to replace them every year. And that allowed them to have that particular niche in the marketplace, and obviously that higher differentiation meant higher profit. Next main subject is customer satisfaction. Again, this should be something we're more familiar with, because we're talking about here how happy are our customers. Now, there are many ways of measuring customer satisfaction, but what I would say is it's absolutely crucial that you have some form of measurement process on a regular basis. And I think that means loads and loads of feedbacks on a regular basis with a number. So it's no good just saying, how happy are you? And the answer is very happy, because you can't determine what that means as a score. And with all of these things, scores are important. So there can be different ways of doing it. So we're now familiar with emails asking us to fill in surveys. There's a website company called SurveyMonkey that tends to be the most popular to do that. Very easy to set up, and you fire an email off after every piece of work or every invoice, and some of the customers will fill that out and it will give you a score. We send out after every invoice a single sheet of A4 paper called Are You Happy? And there's a score on that that they will fax back, and that starts to build up our scores for customer happiness. But I'll just go through probably one of the most well known, certainly amongst the bigger businesses, type of score called the Net Promoter Score. And what this does is effectively say that you have to ask one question of your customers on a regular basis, and they have to be given a choice of a score between 0 and 10. And the question is, how likely are you to recommend us to a colleague or friend? And the answer is 10, definitely, right down to 1, definitely wouldn't. Now, if we just take the numbers I've shown you on the screen here, the way the Net Promoter Score works is to say, well, anybody scoring 1 up to 6 are called a detractor. So they're likely to be out there making negative comments, posting negative reviews, and so on. So they're called detractors. At the top end, if they score 9 or 10, they're going to be called promoters, i.e. they're going to be telling friends and colleagues about your business. They're going to be trying to get you more work, and they're very happy to post very good feedback forms, etc. So they're good promoters. And 7 or 8 are simply passive. They're quite happy with what they're getting. They're not delirious. They're not going out shouting from the rooftops about you, but provided you don't do anything silly, they're not likely to move or change. So they're called passive. And I've put some sample scores here just so you can see how the numbers work out. So you can see that 5% of the customers scored 10, 20% scored 9, and so on. Hopefully, if you add all those up, they come to about 100%, which it should do. And the way you get your Net Promoter Score is basically you add up the total percentage with 9 or 10, the promoters. You add up the total percentage scoring passive scores, and you add up the total people percentages who are detractors. So you break those numbers down into the various categories. What you then do is you ignore the passives and you deduct the detractors percentage from the promoters percentage. So in this case, there were 25% scoring 9 or 10 and 5% scoring 6 or less. So the difference is 20%. Now, hopefully, if you've understood that, then you can see that it's quite possible to have a negative Net Promoter Score, because you could have more detractors than promoters. So it doesn't have to be a positive score. And that gets you the score. Now, what should the score be? Well, the good news is, because this is so well known, that it is a very specific number that is coming out of a lot of businesses. So you can see here some of the benchmarks. Amazon has a score of just over 80%, which is phenomenal. Apple just under 80%, Marriott Hotel Group just over 60%, Google just over 60%. The average, which is typically where you and I are going to be, small businesses, is about 15%. So a good score is going to be anything between 10, 15% or higher. It's very hard to get that many people scoring 9 or 10 in a small business. But certainly you'd want a positive score, and anything below 0 would be a major problem. Now, why is that Net Promoter Score or any customer feedback score useful for a buyer? Well, clearly they're buying your future profits. So if your customer database is full of people unhappy, they're likely to move on shortly, which means that the future profits are either going to be a lot lower, or a lot of work's going to have to be done to get new customers in, both of which means that a buyer wouldn't pay a huge amount of money. The last one, which to be honest is probably the most important, is called hub and spoke. And what that basically says is, are you the owner, the hub of all decisions and processes? So you can see there that all the customers deal with you, employees come to you with questions, suppliers deal with you and quote you, and so on. So if all the business revolves around you, what's going to happen when that hub, you the owner, decides to move on? Well, the fact is that if everything relies on you, the business will simply fall apart. So businesses where you the owner are the hub of the business will probably mean that you're either very low value or possibly not valuable at all. And that's an area that we need to move forward with leading up to exit strategy to try and improve. And again, it's a huge, huge area, so we will come back to that specific thing in terms of how you do it. But you will need to be looking at things like systems, delegation, organisation charts, etc., and also have the mental willpower to say that you're not going to be the hub of everything and that you need to set up the business the way it needs to move on. Exactly like McDonald's. You would never see the owner of McDonald's on the ground floor getting involved with anything. They sit up on the first floor running the business and counting the money, and they allow pimply teenagers to do all the hard work. So huge area that needs to be sorted out, and the last of the 8. So hopefully you found those 8 areas a good guide as to what you need to do, regardless of how you want to move forward with the business in the future. Whichever your decision is in the future, I can guarantee that these are the things you need to be looking at, and it will give you maximum choice when you get there. The shame we have dealing with clients is when they've got potentially great businesses, but they get to retirement and simply decide to chuck the business away and just close the doors, when they could so easily be carrying on getting an income stream or selling it for a huge amount of money. So you've worked hard all your lives. It's crucial that you do get something out of it at the end. How you get something out at the end is entirely up to you. But to say, whatever your choice, today's webinar will help. Finally, just let me run through a few actions that I'd suggest that you do. We will be sending out for all the attendees a series of exercises based on the 8 key points we've discussed today. If you get stuck with any of those or have questions about them, I'm always happy to take questions. You can email me, mark, M-A-R-C, @marklawson.co.uk. We'll also be sending you out a free sellability score questionnaire, and this will take about 15 minutes. And what it will do is it will ask you questions based on those 8 key points, and it will then come up with scores for each of those 8 points and a combined score as to how sellable your business is, and it will also give you a rough business valuation as to how much it's worth now and how much it could be worth if you get your scores up. And that will be available to you with a detailed 15-20 page report completely free. So as I say, the link is on the slide there. If you click on that, then the questionnaire will be there, but we'll also be sending it you in an email shortly in case you don't have time to write that down. And as always, we have our live Business Builder forums that take place every other month, and the next one is on December the 11th, and the subject there is a fairly light-hearted but very important key points, which is 20 things that you can do tomorrow to drastically improve your profit and cash flow. So that's some quick bits, but things that deal with low-hanging fruit, i.e. if you go away and do them, they're very quick to do, but they're also going to improve profit dramatically. So if you can get to that, then great. And again, we'll be sending you invites to that for the 11th of December. In the meantime, thank you very much for attending today. Hope you found it useful, and I hope that we speak and talk to you soon. Thank you.